Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we're doing the third in a three-part webinar series on Kingdom versus World estate planning. And as usual for this webinar series, we have a special guest with us, Cale Dowell. Say hello to the people, Cale.
Howdy, everyone.
Cale is the president of Arcos Global Advisors, where we both work, and has a lot of stories around this. And so this webinar series was really an idea that came up after Jeff Rutt, one of the co-hosts of the podcast, and I did kind of a live recording of some hope givers at their big annual event. And we promised to do kind of a follow-up webinar where we go through kind of this kingdom versus estate idea, and then ask three key questions that we think help folks kind of uncover a custom, unique kingdom-centered path to get maybe a one-of-one estate plan instead of same as everybody else estate plan. Is that fair to say, Cale?
I think that's the hope. That's for sure.
That's the hope. All right, let's go to the next page. So the first two webinars covered these first two questions. First one's how much is enough for us, sort of your financial finish line, and then the second one we did, and you can go back in the in the podcast list and find these. How much is enough for the kids? What we're going to cover today is this question of what do I do with the rest, assuming there's a difference or a delta between your total net worth and the amount you need. What do you do with the rest? And just as a refresher, we like to just kind of talk about this framework, this big picture framework, to kind of expose what the world generally does in estate planning. And if you're listening to this in the car, we'll do our best to explain these slides. But you might want to look on YouTube later to see some of the slides we're sharing. So we'll briefly run through this. I know we've run through this framework, this Kingdom versus World estate planning framework before, but we always try to start with, okay, one of the things that sort of frustrates us in what we do for a living on the wealth management side is we see a lot of very generous people sort of crammed into the same worldly template that everybody else is crammed into, which, Cale, why don't you take a shot at how would you describe in just a couple of minutes what the world's template looks like?
Yeah, I think the world step is, we always like to say it's generally focused on, how do we dump, divide, and dissipate the assets, get it to the next generation as tax efficiently as possible. And not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but it's hyper focused on the numbers. And we think that there's a benefit to kind of let's pause before we just jump straight to the numbers. Let's really understand the narrative, and then let's make sure that the estate plan helps deliver the narrative, the purpose behind what's intended, rather than just defaulting to what might not necessarily lead to the best outcome, depending on what the purpose is. So this is kind of the world's estate plan that you're seeing. If you're listening, it's on the screen right now. But Jeff, maybe I'll kick it back to you to kind of run through that.
Yeah, just briefly on the numbers. We just use a $100 million example. Heck, if all you need in this world is $2 million and you got 10 of net worth, it applies to you. If there's any excess, it applies to you. Maybe not the estate tax number, but we're just using this as an example. So, we were just talking today about wisdom over wealth is what matters. So it's the principles behind this. So we're just taking a $100 million estate, just for simple math, around $30 million you could pass to the next generation. So let's say the last, you listened to webinar 1 and 2 and you said, hey, I've got $100 million as an example. $30 million is enough for me. It's enough for the kids. What do I do with the 70? That's what we're going to talk about today. But in the estate planning world, that 70 is taxed a little over 40%, and there's about a $30 million tax bill on that remaining, call it $70 million. And what generally happens in the world's estate plan, the way we name it, is that you buy an insurance policy to cover that tax, pay it to the IRS, and the kids get everything. Okay. And maybe on page 3, we didn't put it on here, but maybe on page 3 of the estate planner's questionnaire, there's something about, giving a little something to charity. And, you give 100 grand to the church and 100 grand to another ministry or something like that. And we just think that's not a well thought out plan. And to kind of the point you said, Cale, this is sort of the tax, tail wagging the dog. And what we're trying to do is reframe this conversation, like you said, about the narrative. What is God telling you to do uniquely, and then using the tax tools. So we think that that generally gets jammed in. And then how would you sort of frame the kingdom estate plan idea here?
Yeah. So the kingdom estate plan that we're going to talk through and that we've talked through the past couple of weeks now is just one example. It's one example of how someone that wants to be more charitable might rethink their estate plan and not just kind of get jammed into the kind of standard world model of just mitigating taxes and not really taking into account much narrative. So in this particular instance, we're going to use the same kind of size estate plan, but walk through it in a slightly different model that leads to a lot more charitable giving and make some assumptions around answering those first 2 questions of how much is enough for the kids, and then what do I do with the rest? In this case, it would be hyper focus on charitable giving. So Jeff, I'll let you walk through that.
Yeah. So again, if you answered that 30 million is your finish line for you and the kids, what do you do with the rest? And what we would say is, rather than, if that's all they need, why would you give them the whole 100? So you have to answer these 3 questions. So what we're really trying to do in this webinar series, just to reiterate, is give a new framework. Let's just sort of blow up and expose kind of this template that the world uses, and then rethink, how to get a custom one to ask these key questions. So if you've gone through this exercise, you say, in this example, the family's identified 30 million is enough for them and the kids, 70 million, rather than buying an insurance policy to pay the estate tax and give all of it, all 100 million to the kids. Well, you could do a charitable giving with that remaining 70 roughly million and pay nothing to the IRS. So what's one of our principles at Arcos? What happens then?
Disinherit the IRS.
It's one of our favorite. We haven't met a person yet that doesn't want to disinherit the IRS. Maybe you're the first, but we doubt it. So the IRS gets nothing. Charity gets 70 million bucks. We're going to talk today about ways we see stories of families that are doing this, and it brings great joy to them and to their families to think about giving it while you're alive, not when you're dead. And of course, you can do it when you're dead. You could just give that money away. But many of our clients and folks that we know, generous business owners, choose to do a lot of that while they're alive. And of course, there's no insurance cost. So maybe we're showing, if you're just listening to this on YouTube, we're showing a side by side of the kingdom versus world kind of numbers side by side. How would you summarize that, Cale?
Yeah. So again, in the traditional model, as you just walked through, Jeff, I mean, it's all about getting assets off your balance sheet into the hands of the next generation as tax efficiently as possible. Of course, while you're avoiding taxes, and if you're listening, I'm using air quotes here, you're avoiding taxes by buying an insurance policy. Well, the insurance policy costs money. It's still going to pay the IRS. The IRS is still going to get paid. And again, as Jeff alluded to, oftentimes any sort of charitable giving is kind of like a tip on the way out the door, if you will. So in the traditional model, it's all about getting those assets to the next generation. In a more kingdom-oriented model, it's going through this exercise of answering those questions. And again, just for the sake of this conversation, we've alluded to the fact that maybe the answer to the first 2 questions of $100 million estate is 30 million is enough for us and the kids. So we're saying, okay, great, 30 million to the kids. We're going to give away the rest, and we're going to start while we're living. We're going to start doing that while we're living, maybe involve the family in this exercise. The IRS in this case is going to get 0, and I don't need an insurance policy to pay off insurance, so I don't have to pay for that either. So a lot more generosity is going to happen, a lot more cohesion within the family unit is going to happen, a lot more heritage, and also the opportunity to even avoid more taxes while you're alive, not just on the estate side of the equation as well. So that's kind of the short recap of these 2, kind of extreme examples. One being kind of the traditional world way, the other being a very charitable-minded model. But it serves as a starting point. That's kind of the hope in this series is we want to give you guys some practical handholds to rethink what's possible and maybe to slow down a little bit as in the march to get an estate plan put together to make sure that you've got a narrative, or sorry, that the numbers match the narrative, that you've thought through the narrative and that you are empowered to know that you can kind of custom design something for your estate that's right for you and your family.
Yeah, I love that. I think, again, another way to restate what we're trying to say is, narrative over numbers, but start with your calling and then use the tax tools to craft a custom plan. Don't start with taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like you skip over the calling piece. What are you supposed to do? So, enough on maybe the graphs, but we wanted to give you a framework. We love stories, of course, and we've got a million of them. And Cale and I were going through all the stuff we could talk about before we started recording, and it's too much for one podcast. But we're going to do our best to just kind of banter and tell some stories of really cool things we've seen on the podcast, clients we've got, this sort of thing. We're not going to maybe name the clients specifically for privacy purposes, but a lot of these stories are people that have been on the podcast, so they are public with kind of the way they've done some things, and maybe not specifically with numbers, but conceptually how they've worked on that. So why don't you go to the next slide and let's get into our question. So why don't you kind of restate the first two and restate this last one that we're going to talk about today, Cale?
Of course. So the first two questions that we tackled were how much is enough for us, kind of effectively setting some semblance of a financial finish line for you and your spouse if you're married. How much is enough for the kids? And if you answer those two and there's excess, then you do have to answer the question, what do I do with the rest? And so again, it's kind of a nice a way kind of going through that Kingdom versus World estate plan that we just recapped. In this case, there's excess, so we have to actually decide what we're going to do with it. And translation of this, oftentimes, as we get asked this question from families and clients, people we know, a lot of folks in this kind of generous community, there's that, let's say, there's generally a seed of generosity on their hearts. They're not, or maybe a better way to say it is a seed of discomfort on the way the world has kind of told them to do things. They're not completely dead set or certain that that's the right way that's best for them. We're looking to connect wealth with purpose. And so they kind of tend to ask some variation of the question of what are other people like me doing? So what do I do with the rest? And what are other people like me doing?
So maybe we tell a few stories here and then we get into maybe sort of the biblical story as well. But one that's just fresh on our mind, I know you and I were talking about this yesterday. Mm-hmm. Recently did an interview with Tommy Martin, who is for the podcast, who is Tim Tebow's essentially business partner, ministry partner too. But Tommy, just always kind of wanted to be missional. God kind of took him in a business direction. He built and sold several financial firms and developed some wealth, but he just had really a passion for underserved youth and this sort of thing. And it just so happened through some business dealings that he and Tim Tebow met. And, Tommy was thinking about, maybe starting his own foundation, getting into giving around sort of the most vulnerable youth around the globe. And when he heard what he had sort of made a list of 5 things that he wanted to help youth with, and Tebow said, well, here are the 5 things I'm doing in that exact category. And they basically merged their family offices, if you will. And Tommy runs the family office and Tim runs the foundation. And it's like, Tim doesn't have to deal with any of the business stuff. And Tommy doesn't have to deal with any of the giving stuff. He does. And they do that just for fun. But they have kind of this partnership where, I mean, it won't be hard to imagine if you haven't heard Tim Tebow talk, even though he was a quarterback, he talks like a linebacker. He hits you pretty hard. How do you kind of see that as they're all in on one cause and then every dollar they have is kind of going toward that? How do you see that as an example? Cale?
Yeah, I think, to your comment about Tim, I mean, there's no one better, I feel like, in a locker room on just getting people inspired and fired
Fired
up.
up.
So if you haven't had a chance to see Tim speak anywhere, highly encourage you to do it. But I like to think of it as this idea of what those guys figured out is what was they felt, it was God inspired, but they felt they were able to name the wrong they felt like God was calling them to right. So maybe that's a good question for the listener is what's the wrong you were meant to right in the world? And I don't want to prescribe what that literally could be anything. For them, one of the ways that came out was vulnerable youth. It felt it was the wrong that they were meant to right. And so as they're navigating, what do I do with the rest? As you dig into it, almost all of it's focused on vulnerable youth. So they've got a united purpose and they're leveraging their resources, their influence, their talent, all of it. They're going kind of all in. And man, that's a big word for Tim is all in and with this sense of urgency, not waiting, till they die or whatever, but doing it now, being urgent with it now to go all in on tackling that problem of vulnerable youth.
What's another example, Cale, of a podcast guest or a client, maybe without the name or numbers, but that you think of as, kind of going all in on one thing that another way to say it is, what breaks your heart, you
Yeah. What
know?
what what breaks your heart? What's the thing that really breaks your heart? A couple. I mean, one we've mentioned on these past few podcasts. For those of y'all that know the Green Family Hobby Lobby, one of their big things is Bible translation. They've done so much on coordinating and getting a lot of these different Bible translation nonprofits together, working together, collaborating, and they were able to take what was previously, and I'm going to butcher these numbers, but previously I think they had it kind of like mapped out mathematically, like maybe we'll translate the Bible, that'll be complete into all the languages in maybe like 100 or so years. And they've now got that pushed back into, I think it's like 2035 because they've been able to really just go all in on this cause. There's amazing things happening right now, even in like Christian entertainment. For those of y'all listening that have had a chance to watch The Chosen or more recently, House of David is on Amazon. It was number one on Amazon. There's this new resurgence of Christian entertainment, which back in the 50s and kind of the golden era of Hollywood, it was not uncommon for blockbuster films to have some correlation with the biblical theme. You think of Judah Ben-Hur, you think of the Ten Commandments, and then that kind of went out of vogue for a long time. And if you're like me, I grew up with where most Christian media was let's just say it was bad. Bad was probably an understatement. It was pretty lame. And yet there's been some amazing families that have made that a big part of what they feel called to do, which is to kind of empower a renaissance, if you will, within Christian entertainment and see that happen. I'm thinking of another family here in Houston that their thing is evangelism in a 1040 window. If you walk into their family office, they've got a map the size of probably 100 feet long, and I mean they one of their loves in life is to start putting little dots on that map in different areas where they are sharing the gospel in the 1040 window. That's the unique thing that God's laid on their heart. So
Just to back up for a minute, just to give a couple of names, Kelly Merriman, we've had on the podcast, the Generous Business Owner podcast, who came from Netflix and YouTube to start the Wonder Project. She's now the CEO of the Wonder Project that's putting on the House of David. So you can go back and listen to that podcast. You could listen to Brent Dusing. We've done a couple of podcasts with him about he formed a B Corp and is doing gaming for children with Chris Teams in it. Excellent gaming things. So there's all kinds of things being done. To your point, evangelism. We've seen. We've had Rick Graff on the podcast, who now runs SRG's Strategic Resource Group, and I mean he's sold his basically his real estate empire of apartments and is kind of going all in and traveling around that same 1040 window in the hardest places, the Muslim world, basically, and pulling together other investors, if you will, in various nonprofits in that window, and traveling and just it's just amazing how God has moved his heart. I mean, that's a big part of his story, is how God moved his heart for the Muslim world. So I think it's just so cool, isn't it, to see how God works in different people's lives and gives them different callings and how they work this out. I mean, another one is Jeff Rudd, heck, one of the co-hosts of this thing, right? Who founded Hope International for microfinance, and and so he's still running his home building business.
Well,
But
and
his
I would be remiss if I didn't also mention, by the way, I know we're beating our own chest a little bit, but what we're doing at Arcos, Jeff, I mean, the fact that we've gone all in on trying to build the ideal God honoring wealth management company and help people connect money with purpose, in the fact that we're you're donating pieces of the company away. I mean, we're going all that's the wrong we felt like we were meant to write is to create that safe place for these types of conversations and these narratives to take shape and take form. So props to you as well.
Well, thank you. But anyway, there's just a million examples. We've got another great friend that we hope to have on the podcast soon, who's writing a book about his story. But another, really, he himself is an evangelist. So the story you were telling is a guy who sold his energy company and kind of pushed a lot of resources into helping others do evangelism. We have this friend that I'm thinking of that I can't wait to have on is an evangelist himself. So he did also sell his logistics business, but and he is supporting all kinds of evangelistic, things around the globe. But to be with him is to be with a walking evangelist. So we'll be having a breakfast or coffee or even lunch someplace, and he's constantly praying with people, talking about Jesus. We were in a little local breakfast joint in Houston, and he has a little stack of the Book of John with him, and the local firemen and police are kind of having breakfast next to us, and as they're getting up to leave, he stops them and prays with them and hands out a Book of John, and I mean he's just an evangelism machine, and having sold his company that his father started, really enabled him to spend even more time doing the thing that God made him to do. But that is his thing that he's identified. You know, Other people love funding Christian camps, but it's just so cool how it's just endless, isn't it, Cale? The number of possibilities.
Absolutely, and maybe a way to talk, or to get practical, is we can connect this. We've done it every week with some a principle, and so the principle we kind of connected with for this week is deliver blessings. And the verse we've got alongside this, and I won't read it because it's a little lengthy, but it's the parable of the talents, which we've all heard of, the parable of the talents, and we know the different servants were kind of given 1 talent, 3 talents, 5 talents, etc. And they were told to go steward and invest those talents. And then when the master comes home, what did they do? What do they have to say for themselves, so to speak? And of course, there's two of those gentlemen that they invested their talents and they produced a good fruit and they brought it back and they were rewarded. But one kind of buried it. They didn't do anything with it. They weren't urgent about it. And of course, what's given to that servant was taken from them and given to the ones that had done something. And I think it's indicative of our opportunity as believers as we navigate. What do I do with the rest? We answer those first 2 questions. How do we go about the process of delivering blessings in the world, delivering blessings in our family? What are the things that break our heart? What are the wrongs we were meant to right? And this can lead to some very kind of practical things that we can do that we'll talk about here in just a minute. But Jeff, any thoughts from your perspective on that principle?
What's so cool about one thing as we were preparing for this that kind of hit me that I don't think I'd thought about as overtly before about that story. And isn't it amazing how you can read these verses and these stories and something different hits you every time? Was remember the guy with 1 talent that buried it,
Yeah.
and he got kind of yelled at for not multiplying his talent. The guy with 5 turns it into 10, that sort of thing. Okay, good job. Those guys said, good job for doubling it, but they put it to work. And the guy that just buried his talent didn't get the reward. And I think, as we were looking at this kingdom versus world estate planning thing, one of the things we always like to say is we don't think there's obviously there's no sacrifice involved on your part if you're giving away money when you're dead. Okay. And so it made me think of that's a little like burying your talent, you
Mm,
know? Yeah, you're using it, but on yourself, like, and, we were talking about one of our great friends, and, heck, we did a two-part podcast. He had so much wisdom to share with Daryl Heald on the Generous Business Owner podcast. And I would suggest you go back and listen to those. But one of the things that breaks Daryl's heart is, having kind of been a part of the McClellan Foundation, helping start Generous Giving and this sort of global generosity movement. He's met all kinds of really wealthy families all around the globe. And one of the things he is we met with him not too long ago that is breaking his heart is that many of those, no matter how big the net worth is, maybe it's in the billions, they all give $5 million away. Like, it's in the way we sort of say it as well, it's 100 grand to 50 different organizations. You're a pretty big giver to all of them, or $1 million to 5 organizations. Usually it's more than that, but in terms of number of organizations, but it sort of looks okay to the world, but it's not really sacrificial and really that meaningful as a percentage of net worth. And I think, this talent thing isn't just about money. Obviously, it's about your time and your talent, and your treasure. But I just think I think we have to be careful that we only have one life to live and that we're willing to use all of what we have while we're here for
mhm.
some greater purpose. And it's always helping others. It's never about us. It's always about, just in response to the love God's given us, loving other people in whatever way God tells you to do it. So how might you jump off of that?
Well, one thing I was thinking of as you were sharing that, Jeff, is something if you're listening, you've probably heard the phrase before. You can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. And it was making me think of there's a verse in Revelation, and I was looking it up while you were talking, Jeff. It's Revelation 14:13. This is a great verse, by the way. It says, "And I heard a voice from heaven saying, 'Write this down. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them.'" So this concept of you can't take it with you, you can't send it ahead, is right from the Bible. And kind of to your point, Jeff, I think I'm not theological enough to know the answer to this question, but I feel in my spirit, to your point, I'm not going to I don't know if my deeds follow me, if my deed was I buried it, or I didn't do anything with it, while I had agency over it. While I was a steward, I did nothing with it. I don't know if that follows me per that verse, but I think if I do something with it now, today, I go for it. I'm all in. I think that's what follows us into heaven. So that was kind of one takeaway. But the other thing,
If you want more on that, to me, we also had Randy Alcorn on the podcast. Go back and look at that, the Generous Business Owner podcast. And I just think God gave him one thing, okay, and he's an amazing writer and speaker. But his one thing is the line you said, which is that biblical truth that you can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. And
yeah,
so it's just it's this upside down kingdom, right? Of
yeah,
once you sort of empty yourself, you get it all back, but
yeah.
not for your own purpose, but you do have joy, for God's purposes. But you have the joy and the abundant life. I know the abundant life is one of your favorite verses.
Yes.
Share how you think about that.
Yeah, so obviously that comes from John 10:10, where Jesus says, I have come to that you might have life and have it in abundance. So I think of that in the context of like living abundantly. What does an abundant life look like? And we have stories from Scripture, but like, man, through Jeff, through the podcast, through what we've get exposure to, and what we do for a day job, we get to meet some amazing people and amazing families that, to me. And I'm not saying everything's perfect, but like they are living an abundant life. And what are the themes? What are the common threads? What are the principles that, because they're all different, but there's the common threads of people that you may meet where you can just feel it in your bones. This person is living abundantly. Like, what are the common threads? One of the common threads, for sure, is a generous spirit, a generous heart. Another one, humility. Another one, intentionality. I mean, there's these common threads that speak of what an abundant life is. And guess what's not a common thread? How much money they had? That's not a common thread. Um, if anything, arguably, as the dollars tick up, you tend to see less generosity in many cases. Um, so I've always been inspired by that, and then as we get to hear these amazing stories of people that are pursuing that own unique calling on their life, that core purpose, and aligning their resources with that. Part of that resource being their wealth, but also all these other things that we're talking about. It's amazing to see that kind of abundant life come to fruition. It's something that I, personally want to pursue with my own family. And that brings me to another point, which is, we talked about a lot about last week about, the next generation and kids. And last week's question was, how much do I, how much is enough for the kids, or how do I not screw up the kids with wealth? And I think this idea of having kind of a unique core purpose, but especially with what I do with the rest, this kind of core purpose starts to build this legacy mindset and this heritage that your kids can participate in and be a part of. We like to say often, we said it last week, more is caught than taught. And so when our kids can see us pursuing something that God's called us to, that can also often be a very empowering blessing that we provide to our kids as a part of that kind of full inheritance that we talked about last week.
Well, I think the that kind of leads me, from a webinar perspective, we've got two primary questions from the to answer in this webinar, and that kind of leads me, I think, to the first one, which is, a lot of people. Well, if you're going to figure out what breaks your heart, a lot of people talk about, how do you figure out that out, and where's a starting place? And I know there's some there's some coaches out there that are great. We've had Bill High on that does a great job with mission, vision, and values and these sort of things. There's all kinds of sort of hard dollar consultants that'll help you align your money with all your documents and these kind of things. But what's just a simple exercise? This is what people are asking. Like,
Yeah.
how do I get started? Kind of identifying these things. What would be? I know we have a little exercise we take people through at Arcos. What's a simple little exercise, Cale, where people can start to identify maybe their family values or something like that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll give a little context to that exercise. Something when we first launched, we had learned from a lot of these amazing folks that had much lengthier ways to kind of start to build some core values, core mission, purpose, all these different kind of buzzwords you hear, and they're wonderful and amazing, but sometimes they were almost too weighty, too much, for someone to kind of wrap their mind on.
Well, for us, in what we do, I mean, yeah.
Exactly. And so, my encouragement, what we encourage people to do is start with something simple, like just see if you can name three values, three words that you and your spouse feel like really speaks to this, summarizes what we feel like God has called us to be as a family. And by the way, that exercise will be hard enough. Just that one, it could take some time for just to agreement on those three words. And maybe, my wife and I did this for ourselves, and we started out, we got those three words, and we kind of, paired it with some scripture. And over time, we've added a few extras, but it started with just that simple exercise. Can we identify kind of three core values? And where that kind of idea comes through is, like, if you look at a lot of old school, crests or mottos, a lot of times, around the crest, they'll have three kind of core virtues or values or whatever you want to call them. So that would be my suggestion as a starting point, is just, if you don't have that already, chat with your spouse, see if you can identify three words that really
I mean, you could do it on a date night, right?
exactly.
Like, I mean, where you
Exactly.
just say, "Hey, let's talk about what do we, if we kicked around three, what would they be?" And maybe one or two overlap, and the third one you sort of debate, and you go with a compromise of four. I mean, if you, if you so it doesn't really matter, but I think what that becomes is kind of a way to say no to certain things and a way to
Hmm.
say yes to certain things. And so, like in our family, we use faith, family, and education. All right. And so the way we think about those is faith, giving. So we're willing to do, be involved in faith-related activities together, do giving together, that sort of thing. Like, what are we going to spend our money on, if you will, in
Yeah.
that giving thing? What are we gonna from a family perspective, we like to just be together. Okay, so maybe that's a filter for if we're gonna take a vacation. Okay, maybe we try to pay for a lot of it if we can, that sort of thing, or combined vacations and that sort of thing. Education's another one. Okay, so we think the family farm is now education. So we don't have a family farm. So the way we think you can make money is with your brain. So let's educate your brain and make you employable and find something that you love to do and be productive on. So those are just ours, but at least it's a starting point to be able to say, does what's coming down the pike fit these basic values? So I think that's a good place to start. Any other thoughts before we move on to the second question?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would maybe suggest too, depending on the ages of your kids, obviously, if they're still young, the fun part is you can start to include them in this process of those values. If they're older, already left the roost, and kind of launched, if you will, another thing to do in addition to this, or practical thing, is writing out. We like to encourage people to write out the narrative of their wealth, which would include, if you've kind of figured out these values, what that wrong is that you felt called to right. We think that's a powerful tool to provide to the next generation, especially if they're older at some point, because we often think that, like, our kids know our story, they know how we made it, or they know what we're passionate about. But you'd be surprised in our line of work, how often that's just not the case. It can't be spent or told enough. So we think there's a benefit in just kind of writing out that narrative of how was it built, what was it, what do you intend it for, what are those core values. Especially if your kids are older, at least they've got something that's been, was typed up, written up by mom and dad, that can kind of undergird kind of a sense of who they are and what this family's all about. So that'd be one other kind of exercise.
Okay, let's move on to the second question, which now, we sort of had this framework we put up, which is very general about a kingdom versus world framework. The other question we get a lot is, what are the structures people use? So, you said, what do other people like us do with this excess? So let's say you've identified this excess.
Yep.
Maybe you've identified what we're talking about, the purpose, these values, the thing that breaks your heart, all of those kind of things. We're going to do it together. That's all great. Okay, now how do we do it? How do other people structure this? Where would you start that conversation?
Yeah, well, that's obviously one of the reasons why we love that kingdom versus world conversation. Is it's an extreme example, but it's one example of someone that's extremely generosity inclined to just, instead of just dump, divide, dissipate, and mitigate taxes. It's all about generosity. But there's the fun part about this is there's lots of other structures that can achieve different results for different reasons. So you of course can just donate your illiquid assets, leverage the whole balance sheet. If you have a business that you own, you can donate the business, and still keep it within the family. I mean, the Greens, they've done that exceedingly well. They've donated, 99% of the business. They still have it all within the family. They still keep the one controlling share, but there's other options out there. There's, thanks to Pete Oakes, who's on the podcast. Pete Oakes has helped kind of pave the way on the Purpose Trust, which is just another vehicle that can allow you to house your business inside of a trust that always has a religious purpose. There's charitable remainder trust. There's different versions of that. So there's a variety of different structures, and which is one of the reasons why the narrative part of the conversation is so important. If you can nail down in layman's terms the narrative of where you feel like God's calling you to do, and take the time to figure that out, then all these different structures are just the means to the end. And so it pays to work with people that obviously know about these different structures and how to navigate which one would be best. But again, we would just can't encourage enough the kind of, let's pause, start talking about that narrative. And just if there's nothing else that you take away from today on the structure side, just know that there's not a one size fits all way to do this, which is kind of what the world's way is. It's just the one size fits all way is let's avoid taxes and get it to the next generation. There's a lot of different structures out there, and there's a lot of generous business owners that have made use of a variety of different structures that have enabled them to put that narrative into an actual structure and make sure that the dollars and the wealth is connected with the core purpose. And that's what we see as we talked about earlier, people really living an abundant life.
Yeah, I think so. I would say there's three or four kind of primary buckets, if you will, of structures. If if you want to kind of follow the Barnhart way of doing things, you reference the Greens. We're working on getting the Greens lawyer on the podcast to explain exactly that structure. But we have had Alan Barnhart on. He has explained how we're doing it. We're at Arcos. We're following his model and giving chunks. We've given 20%. We're, God willing, we'll continue to give more of it. But like you said, there's a controlling vote, basically a committee or trust with trustees that control the business. So you're not giving up control of the business, but you're donating the economic ownership to a foundation, in this case, the National Christian Trust, if you will. So you can maintain control, but the sort of Barnhart model is if you're willing to sort of give a portion of the ownership to charity or all of it to charity. Pete Oakes, we did a podcast with. Go back and look at that with Generous Business Owner of a Purpose Trust that you referenced. What Pete did, I thought was genius. This has not been around but for about 5 years, where Patagonia was in the news for giving away that business to a purpose trust. Well, that purpose of the trust was to preserve the environment. Okay, great. So Pete took that same tax rule and said to build the kingdom, essentially, okay, for, as you said, religious purposes. Now, that trust can have different kind of ownership. Family can own it, outside investors can own it, a charitable entity can own it. And this is sort of really for the companies that want to continue. In Pete's case, he loves to help build 100-year companies. So something 100-year companies with multiple economic owners. Okay. Now, some people are just called to sell. These are for existing businesses. Some people, it's okay. Okay. If God tells you to sell it. It's not against God's word to sell a business. And I think sometimes we get wrapped up in these things about trying to keep the thing forever. If God says to sell it, sell it. And there's a million ways to sell the thing. You can do an ESOP. We're looking at having an ESOP expert on the podcast to kind of explain how that all works. You need a little bit of time to do it. You don't do it all at once. It takes 4 or 5 years. You got to want to have the employees involved. It's tax effective, all of that sort of thing. But it's a sale. Make no mistake. You can do some charitable things within it, but it is a sale. Obviously, you can sell it to a strategic partner, to private equity, all kind of options there. And then you reference like a charitable remainder trust, which kind of gets into a lot of these things. Sort of, many of them are at death that it sort of kicks in. So there's that whole, and that gets a little closer to the traditional estate planning world. And there's a million. We don't have time to go into all that alphabet soup, but we just want to expose you to some different stories and some different ways of doing things. And I think a lot of times, I think this is where having a guide helps. How do you think about that, Cale?
Yeah, I think like in anything in life, it really helps to have a guide when you're going somewhere that maybe you haven't been before. It really helps if that guide's aligned. And so as you navigate the nuances of having the right, financial structure, the right family structure, there's a lot of amazing folks out there that are experienced. They're in the space, whether that's on the estate planning side, the tax side, the financial, advisory side, the family governance side. Some people do all of it. There's amazing folks out there that operate as guides that are aligned. They understand your worldview. And it literally pays dividends when you work alongside those types of folks. When they're not aligned, not to say that it can't work, but we've seen it not work in lots of cases. I mean, we've had meetings where, not to pick on an estate planner, but estate planner client wanted to give away a lot of money. The estate planner was like, why in the world would you want to do that? I mean, almost thought they were being, negligent of some kind. So they just could not fathom that someone would want to do that or would have that sort of calling, whereas someone that was maybe more aligned might get it. But you know what? I say that, Jeff, even fellow believers, I know that's kind of the funny story with Alan is he had an estate planning attorney that was aligned, but still was kind of incredulous on like, you want me to do what? So pays to work with people that are aligned. It pays to work with people that have gone down these paths before, know the well-worn paths and also the different pitfalls to avoid. So,
well, I think again, kind of our heart on this is by doing this generous business owner podcast, and we may turn that into a nonprofit. And I'm spending a lot of time on that, and Cale's helped with that. Obviously, Jeff Rudd and Alan Barnhart have helped a lot. And kind of our heart under that banner of generous business owner is to just get everybody thinking about the kind of things we've shared in this webinar. And the reason we do all these podcasts is really just to inspire people and maybe equip you a little bit with some other stories. And what are other people doing? We want to normalize this idea of chasing after what we were talking about, this abundant life that always involves loving other people and committing your life to whatever it is God has for you. And so, look, I always use the Elon Musk example. He thinks everybody should drive an electric car, and he gave away all his technology to the other car makers and encouraged them to build electric cars too. But of course, he's like, but if you ask me where to buy a car, I'll probably tell you Tesla. So it's the same thing with me. I'm still involved with Arcos, but my heart is that you really, anybody listening to this really just follows the call of God. But I think you do need an aligned team to help take you there. It's okay if it's not Arcos. Find another group that's aligned and has the expertise to do it. But if you don't have somebody, call Cale. Cale, how do they reach you?
They can reach me. Well, I'm sure we'll put it on the show notes and stuff like that.
Show notes, yeah.
They can you can shoot me an email at Cale Cale.Dowell Dowell at arcosglobal.com. That's Arcos ARKOS global.com.
All right. Well, Cale, thanks so much for being with us.
My privilege. Always a blessing to be here and amongst amazing, generous business owners.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Share it with a friend, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.